Hello and welcome to this session, and we're honored to welcome Marc Cox. He is the author of The Business Case for Love, and he's right here with us. Welcome, Marc. How wonderful to see you here.
Well, it's good to be with you. I'm speaking from about 20 miles outside of London, and it's dark and horrible, and it's my least favorite time of the year because the clocks went back yesterday, as it did I guess in most parts of the world, and it means that it's dark by 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. So and it's past my gin and tonic time as well. So I'm being a good boy and just having a glass of water. But it's a joy to be here and talk a little bit about the business case for love. Should I start off by giving a little bit of context, Ron?
Please, yes, go ahead. I was on mute. I'm just watching give your presentation first.
Okay. Well, my work is all about company culture, and I founded my company, the Company Spirit, over 14 years ago. And as its founder, I get hired by CEOs and leadership teams to basically help them understand what their company stands for and what makes it different. To do this, I help them create an authentic set of values, sense of purpose and beliefs, which their employees get and customers feel. And that's what I call the company spirit. Now, when I started my company, part of what made my approach different was the use of the word love. And as you can imagine, it was very polarizing, with a lot of senior people seeing it as a very soft and fluffy idea and nothing to do with business. So to help me overcome these objections, I set about creating what I call the business case for love and why it was important. And I've now used this with my clients over the last decade. And ultimately, this led me to writing the philosophy and approach down in my book, The Business Case for Love, released in April 2020, which was tricky to do any book reviews or book signings, because as we all know, that was a month after the world went into lockdown. So an interesting time to launch a book. Now, my start point was my own experiences and observations. Which companies did I love and why? And the more I looked into this, the more it seemed to me that these companies, both big and small, all behaved in a different way. These companies, they work hard with their employees to engage them around a clear sense of purpose and company culture. They were proud and confident of what made the company different, and they all had the mindset of wanting to create a memorable customer experience. And from my perspective, these companies seem to have a winning approach, and right for the times we lived in post 2008, which, for those of us who remember, was pretty much a financial Armageddon. And whilst others at the time were really losing their appeal. So in simple terms, it became clear to me that if a company wants to have a strong emotional relationship with their customers, it needs to do the same with their employees. When this happens, employees who love what they do normally care more and are more productive, whilst customers who really do love the experience are more than happy to tell others. And it's my experience, the company gets bragged about and their business grows in a sustainable way. And that's what I mean by the business case for love. And interestingly, over the 15 years or so that I've been working in this way, it's not bound by category or size of business, but it's by the attitude, and particularly the attitude of the CEO and the leadership team. And they must want to embrace this mindset for it to be for it to be successful. Now, I think one of the interesting things for me is that the real driver for change over the last decade is actually what employees want from work. And the vast majority that I've worked with and come across, in the UK, Europe, the US, and most parts of the world that I've been lucky enough to work with, in most parts of the world where I've been lucky enough to work with, and the broad set of companies I work with, people want to feel proud of what they do. And they want their company to have a set of ethics and a clear sense of purpose, which is both authentic and lived by their bosses. Interestingly, also, they do not want to work long-term for a company or a boss who says one thing and does another. And again, in my experience, this is a view strongly held by millennials and even more by Gen Z. And I think, you know, given I'm older than both the millennials and certainly the Gen Z, I think one of the exciting things in many ways is that a generation refuses to put up with stuff in perhaps the way that my generation has, about where they work, how they work, and the culture that they work in. Now, right at this moment, or for the last 2 or 3 years, we seem to be living in an age of perma-crisis. And that means that the last few years have really tested leadership behaviors as never before. And has found many bosses, I would say, struggling in their ability to adapt. And crucially for me, those that understand the need to create love, care, and empathy amongst their employees and customers, those are the ones that have thrived. And those, on the other hand, that have continued to lead in what I call a cold, head-led way, have really struggled with the needs of their employees and customers in a world that's changed dramatically post-COVID, but really over the last 15 years has really changed in what makes a successful business environment. So that's the context for the business case for love. Hello.
Sorry, I was compiling. There are several comments and questions here on the question lines, so I'm just trying to compile them together. Quite a few of them. So, oh, interesting. Your book is about love. So, good point. Any advice on how to deal with a bad boss? I know your book is about love, but how can love prevail if there's a lot of stress in the environment or passively aggressive people on leadership positions?
I think, well, that's a hell of a question to start with. I suspect it's not easy. Now, one of the things that, I guess it depends where it all starts from, but there are certain bosses that really struggle with the whole idea of creating empathy amongst their teams, to the extent they may well be quite misogynistic and they may well be quite narcissistic. And frankly, you're never going to change those people. And I think one of the more obvious things is that people have the confidence to say, you know what, this environment isn't for me. When I can, and it may not be tomorrow, I need to find a company where my values and the values of the company are much more closely aligned. So I think one of the challenges, or one of the positives of the transition over the last few years, is there's much more emphasis on what I would call fit. You know, the link between personal values, what I stand for as an individual, and company values, what the company believes in and stands for.
Okay, a different kind of question. So, so not just thinking about what employees want, but also different generations have different wants for their company. So, did you notice that? So, different generations wanting different things from the company. So, how does the company react how to tend to so many different ones?
Yeah, I think I think if we start with what I would call the Gen Z generation, I mean, they're much more wired, in my opinion, to making sure that they work for a company that they really, really believe in. And therefore, for their bosses, they're probably a lot more pushy and I wouldn't say aggressive, but happy
Passive
to,
aggressive.
yeah, happy to point out good and bad. And I think, what I find with a older generation is, sadly, there are a chunk of people who have ended up working for companies that actually they don't particularly love, and they've gone through, maybe many careers or many years where they've ended up really just working to pay the bills rather than working to actually have any greater sense of purpose and greater enjoyment from love. It's interesting, in the UK, there's been quite a lot of talk over the period since the pandemic about the number of people who haven't returned to work who are in their 50s and older. And the Financial Times did an interesting piece about this, and it reinforced the point we've just been saying, that one of the reasons why people haven't gone back to work is, frankly, they don't enjoy work. And actually they've ended up in a situation where they've said, what, I can't cope with working, I can't change my boss, I can't change the company I work in, I'm old enough and probably got enough money put aside to say that's it. Sad, but true.
A different kind of question. So you mentioned corporate culture. So what is your take? Some people want a strong corporate culture. Others think it's too stifling. Younger people want a softer corporate culture. What is your take on soft versus strong culture?
Well, I think the most important thing is it needs to be authentic. And there are many definitions of culture, but culture to me isn't about a sort of a controlling, policing culture. For me, a culture is about a spirit, an energy that is based on how the company has behaved when it's been its best. So that and I think one of the sad things about companies is that they often start, I mean, most companies, when they start, it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people who start a company, and by definition there's a very strong spirit, there's a very strong energy, because people are trying to create something new, they're trying to get something going, they've probably got a burning desire to do something, and unless they're careful, over time they can lose that very energy and spirit, and it gets dissipated because they haven't looked after it.
Okay, so I have a different kind of question here. So starting from abroad, assuming you're abroad, well, I guess he is abroad, depending on the perspective. He may say we are abroad. So do you have any advice on how to make international teams work a little better? It seems cultural differences get on the way. So working with people of different cultures.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I'm currently working with a digital team in Munich, and although it's based in Germany and it's a German company, actually they've gone out to all parts of the world to hire the best people they can find, and therefore there's a very culturally diverse group of people there. And what I found working with them is that in order to bring things together, you have to help them create their own identity, their own sense of who we are, and do it company-wide. So it's not about, and then in my experience, and certainly what's happened with the Munich team, is it doesn't matter, therefore, where you come from. You've all got a common sense of purpose. You've all got a common view about what the company is trying to do, and a common set of beliefs in why it's important. But that's not to say that working in a different environment, moving from a different country to a different company or different organization hasn't got huge challenges. And often those challenges aren't in work. It's more, how does my partner, cope with being in a new environment? What happens about the schooling? So all those things that can add up outside of work that can affect how you're feeling inside of work.
Wonderful. And I know your book is about the business case for love, but the questions from LinkedIn are coming about the opposite. So not so much love, but the absence thereof. So specifically, so any advice on how to deal with conflict in the workplace?
I think, there's the normal kind of HR channels that you can go through, but maybe I'll quote one of my, which is not my proverb, but it's a famous proverb which I've always seen as coming from Japan, which is the fish rots from the head. And conflict normally the conflict needs to be resolved at the top, because if the leadership team or the bosses are allowing a culture where conflict happens lower down, then ultimately where it needs to change is at the top, and that's a challenge, because depending on where you are in the organization, it may not be particularly easy to be able to do that. But again, in my experience, what the more contemporary organizations, they now have much more of an open door policy where people can walk in and and talk to the boss, talk to the CEO, and actually have confidence to call things out.
Okay, well, we have a different comment/question. So I think you mentioned about knowing what the real culture is. So don't we know what is the real culture when the company is at its worst or at a crisis?
That's a really interesting way of looking at it. I think no, but I think what happens when a company is in crisis is, it's certainly in my experience, is communication stops, and internal communication stops, and sadly often bullying happens, where I've been involved in my work with a lot of turnarounds, and therefore I've often spoken to people who have stayed after the previous leadership have gone because of the issues at the company, and they always say the same thing, that the leadership team or the CEO or the bosses, as the company got more into more difficult circumstances, they became more and more entrenched into not talking to anybody, and would kick out against other people who were trying to help, and therefore you ended up with a culture which was horrid, where it was people didn't want to go to work because they didn't feel they were listened to, they didn't feel they could contribute, and that's the opposite to what I think most people want from their bosses, and again, in my experience, they want a combination of clarity. This is what we're trying to do. This is why we're doing it. These are the objectives, but more than ever, they want a sense of collaboration. They want to feel involved, or employees want to feel involved in creating that culture and bringing that strategy alive, rather than being told to do something.
Okay, I do have a comment/question. I will try to elaborate because the comment was somewhat short. So I think we should talking about culture. So this specific conference focuses on women and minority. And the question we got here is, how about the female versus male-oriented team? So I believe here in terms of values. So some cultures value competition over collaboration. So what's your take on that? So female versus male-oriented cultures, and then places of work where they don't stress collaboration, they value competition. So how can we make things work in those situations?
Um, Again, you sort of can't change the world, or you can't change the situation you're in. I personally, I think the companies that have succeeded most strongly over the recent past are the ones that have fostered a collaborative way of working. And those that foster a conflict or competitive style ultimately struggle, because people or employees reject increasingly that style of leadership. So whilst I wouldn't say right at this moment companies that have got a collaborative culture, you know, are winning hands down, for me there has been a real shift. And if we look at some of the companies that have both in the UK and Europe that have, you know, gone bankrupt over the last few years, particularly during the COVID days, quite often when you went back into the culture, it was that what I would call quite old school, competitive, setting one against one style of approach, which, you know, has had its day.
Yeah, well, I can share my experience. I came from the semiconductor years, you know, many years in semiconductor industry. It was, of course, over competitive because it was only the paranoid survive, right? And it's interesting, you know, so the comment that they made here about, you know, women versus men, and some women adopted a very man-like behavior and they're very aggressive, and other women did not. They remained who they were. And those were sincerely the most successful leaders because they were true to themselves and they didn't let the culture, the corporate culture, overwhelm them. Rather, they imposed their work style onto the culture, right?
Well, it's again, you know, what's been interesting with the recent team I'm working with in Munich is the mothership is a massive construction company that has got a worldwide operation. So it's pretty male. And the world of construction is pretty male. It's tough, it's hard hats, it's boots and everything else. And yet, you know, the great thing is that the company, the digital division is almost, you know, 50-50, you know, male, female. And only last week when I was over there, you know, one of the teams I've helped set up in terms of creating this authentic culture is what I call an employee experience team. And within the employee experience team, there is a huge energy by the women in the team to actually not only make their voice heard, but it's more importantly to actually understand different needs, different ways of working, but also to make sure that there is the goals and the structural ladder will allow the best to come to the top, whatever, you know, race, religion, or sex they are.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
And I think, you know, I have to say, you know, it's a challenge within, you know, the broader organization where, you know, it's coming out to 100 years old. It's still family run. You know, they've got a very traditional set of values, but the world around them is changing. And I think that for me is my comment to those who are listening. It is, whilst, you know, those people who are working in a difficult environment might be saying, well, you know, what can I do to change it? In broad terms, I see the the strength of employees nowadays to really create and demand change from their leadership is forever increasing.
A different kind of question, but again, remaining on the gender issue. So there is always competition between male and female workers. So why is that? Do we have hours to compete, the opposing genders, or is there another way of working?
I mean, you know, I've got you know, the three team leaders that I'm working with in Munich. One is a lady and two are guys, and I just don't think there's no difference, you know. And I think maybe in other parts of the world, you know, the differences are greater. That's not to say, and I think, you know, I'm very conscious of the fact that you know, there are still biases out there. You know, there are still biases against certain ethnicities. Sometimes there are certain biases against certain against women. But all I would say genuinely is I believe the companies who are sustainably successful in the world of 2023 and 2024 have got a much better handle over this issue. And that they recognize that you cannot have these biases in the way that you might have been able to have in the past.
And perhaps they are indeed biases, and so I can't tell the places where people are asking the question from, but I assume it's mostly US. So the US is perhaps a very competitive driven kind of culture. So do you see Europe different from the US in this sense? I mean, the European Union making more strides towards equality for women versus where we are right now?
I think, you know, so I've worked a few times in the States, and you know, I do understand, you know, there are different labor laws. You know, it's easier to fire people, you know, in many ways than is in parts of Europe. But I suppose, you know, the core of what I'm talking about for me is that wherever you are in the world, you want to work in an organization where you feel valued. I mean, the last two companies the last two areas I worked with in the States, I mean, couldn't have been more of a contrast in terms of weather. You know, one was Austin, Texas, and the other one was, you know, Madison up north of Chicago. But, you know, when I was working with those, and one was a software company and one was a sort of more of a manufacturing-based company. But when I was working with both companies, I mean, you know, the employees, they got what I was talking about. You know, it wasn't, oh, you know, this doesn't fit, or this doesn't, I don't understand, I don't get what you're talking about. You know, they got that actually what they craved, to be honest, Ron, for a culture where they could feel valued, and they did, and they wanted to love it. You know, that people want to go to work because they want to enjoy what they're doing, and you know, that's a massive driver for people. It's not just, you know, obviously for the vast majority of people, money matters. You know, your salary and your remuneration, all those things matter. But, you know, when I talk to all the people I know in recruitment in all parts of Europe and also aspects of the States, the vast majority of people, when they look for a job, money isn't number one anymore. It's probably number three or number four. But the first bit is what does the company stand for? Has it got a sense of purpose? How does it feel to work there? And yes, then the money comes. And again, I think that's a shift, you know, and it's a positive shift. Now, there's probably people out there listening to this thinking, well, you know, it doesn't feel like that for me, but you know, that's a trend. And I think the thing is, this is all about trends. it's not black or white. It's not, and again, when I said in my introduction, I founded the company Spirit, 15 years ago. And when I used the word love, it was almost laughed out of court. And I have to say, the vast majority of people now at least understand the concept. They might not want it. They might not, say I might not, and certain people aren't able to generate that, but at least they understand the concept, which is a shift. So all these things are trends rather than a sort of, black and white moment.
Wonderful. Well, folks, we are unfortunately running over time here. Thank you so very much, Marc. Marc Cox, the author of The Business Case for Love. Thank you so very much for your time. Wonderful to see you. And folks, thank you so much for your comments and questions.
And Ron, thank you for the opportunity. I hope that helped. I hope at the very least it gave a few fresh insights and fresh perspectives to your audience. And good luck with the rest of the conference.
Thank you so very much. As always, wonderful to see you and speak with you. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Take care.